I don't know your name, sorry.
Yaakov, which is like Jacob.
But in Hebrew, Yaakov. Okay, I was listening to you, and what caught my attention is what you said about the Apostle Paul, right? That for you, he was more Roman than Jewish. If you could give me, let's say, a solid argument to determine that. Those are your words, right?
Because obviously I didn't say he was more Roman than Jewish, but rather that he was pro-Roman. That's what I said.
Okay, pro-Roman.
Yes, he was pro-Roman. I didn't say he was more Roman than Jewish because I have no evidence that he was Jewish. I know that he was pro-Roman. For example, what about him? In the same Christian account, Paul is presented as having Roman citizenship, first of all, who advocates for Rome and works for Rome, persecuting other Jews who they say he was persecuting Christians, but the Christians were Jews. That is, he was a guy persecuting Jews. You see, that's the scenario. And basically what Paul does is take the blame away from Rome to put it on, or absolve Rome of what was the crucifixion, basically. Okay.
All right, very good. Let's see. We'll say it part by part. Obviously, you're talking about Paul's Roman citizenship, right? But this, Mr. Yakov, doesn't prove that Paul was pro-Roman, right? It's, in a way, a matter of your own thinking. Why? Because having Roman citizenship in the first century was a legal status, right? Which could be acquired, as you well know, by birth or through family inheritance. Now, in the book of Acts of the Apostle Paul uses his citizenship to protect himself from legal abuses. But that, obviously, I repeat, does not prove political loyalty to Rome, okay? That's just, let's say, a prejudiced thought on your part. Now, the Apostle Pablo constantly identifies himself as a Jew. But here there's a double standard from you. On one hand, you take it as a fact, right, that Pablo was Roman because he had Roman citizenship, and you say, I have no proof of that. But on the other hand, you don't say anything when Pablo identifies himself as a Jew. There I see that there's some dishonesty on your part. And we can see this in the letter to the Philippians, chapter 3, verse 5, where it says, circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. You're showing a double standard. Go on, I'm listening.
Okay. What I'm saying is this. I'm not saying that he was pro-Roman just because he had Roman citizenship. I'm saying that he was pro-Roman because he clears, and I'd like you to address this argument, he clears Rome's responsibility in the crucifixion of Jesus first. Second, he persecuted Jews on behalf of Rome. He says that supposedly he was sent by the high priest, that is the Roman Sadducean elite. And third, what you quote doesn't specify that he was a Jew. What it says is that he was a Hebrew of Hebrews. Let's say Hebrews are Jews from the tribe of Benjamin. By the 1st century, it's unclear who belongs to which tribe. The issue of the tribes had already become mixed up 700 years earlier. Very hard to know. So it seems to me that it's kind of like trying to put on a Jewish identity, a justification to explain that, well, yes, I was born in Tarsus, but I have to explain to you that I am a Hebrew of Hebrews and I'm super Jewish, and I'm trying to explain to the audience that he has some connection to Judaism and why he has to do it. Because people knew that he was a persecutor of Jews, that he was on Rome's side. That's why they knew him, for persecuting Jews on behalf of Rome. So after his conversion, he has to say, no, bro, I'm also Jewish, I'm sorry, or I changed my views or whatever. But basically, that's why those are my arguments. Give me a second, Betsy, thank you. They say, we missed you, how are you? Thank you, I'm amazing. And thanks for your donation. Thank you very much, Betsy. And I would like you, if you can, to address how it was possible that Pablo literally went to persecute, to kill, let's be more precise, other Jews on behalf of Rome.
Okay, perfect. Very interesting points you're making, Mr. Yakov. There's something interesting here, isn't there? The Apostle Paul wasn't working for Rome when he persecuted the church, was he? Unless you, let's say, show me a New Testament Bible verse that states this claim. I repeat, you are drawing conclusions based on your prejudices against the Apostle Paul. Why is this? Because according to the account in the book of Acts, Paul acted with authorization from the Jewish religious authorities and not from Rome. There I see that you've made a mistake as big as a cathedral. I don't know if it's a mistake.
Sorry, I didn't ask your name.
Sorry.
I didn't ask your name, sorry.
Juan.
The Jewish authorities who were there, the Sadducees in the temple, who put them there?
Who? How, sorry?
Historically, I don't know how much history you know, because if you claim that my mistake is as big as a cathedral, I want you to explain it to me. Who put the Jewish Sadducean authorities in the temple?
Okay. I'm going to answer you, but I'm going to clarify something for you. According to the account in the Acts of the Apostles, Paul acted with authorization from the Jewish religious authorities.
And who put those authorities there?
Not Sadducees, but Jewish.
He says the high priest, a Sadducee, sent him. He's quoting me. Acts chapter what? 22? Didn't you say that also in chapter 9? I think the same paraphrase is mentioned. They were the Sadducees. Do you know who put them there?
All right. According to what I understand, I don't know if you're going to correct me, all right? It's true, I admit it, I'm honest. It's true that the appointment and removal of the high priests was under the control of Rome. All right? Why? Here's a reason why. Because we have to be honest. Because obviously the Jewish people were under Roman rule. But that doesn't mean Rome decides what the Jews have to do. Because Rome didn't get involved in religious matters. Okay, we're confusing two things. Unless you believe that the Jews of that time, then I'll take your argument. Then I can determine that the Jews of the first century were all Romans. Why? Because they were under Roman rule. That's what you're telling me.
No. What I'm saying and what you're saying is that there are people. If a person works and is in agreement and acts with fervor and with permission, in other words, they were authorized to do so by the Sadducean authorities who had been appointed by Rome, then that person is aligned with what Rome wants. Not all Jews of the time agreed with them. In fact, the vast majority, the masses, were with the Pharisees. The Pharisees are against the Sadducees. The Essenes left, literally. The Qumranites lived in the desert just to be far from the Sadducees, because they said the temple had been taken over and that the temple was already completely corrupted, and that's why they went into some caves that weren't discovered until 1947. So no, the Jews were not with them. Paul presents himself as a Jew who was not only with them, he was a great persecutor. And you're telling me that he had authorization, and you said religious, and you just told me that they didn't get involved in religious matters, but we see that the very words I said contradict themselves in less than 3 minutes. But yes, the Romans had put the Sadducees in charge. The Sadducees, according to what Acts says, had sent Paul, and Paul, a persecutor of the church, but really it's not the church, it's an unknown abstraction. He was a persecutor of Jews because the first Christians were Jews. So that's the scenario. Jews.
A Jew had converted to Christianity. I mean, seriously, I'll be honest.
Jews?
Yes, Jews who had converted to Christianity. I mean, Mr. Jacob, we have to call things as they are. But I'll give you an example. But
do you agree that he was a persecutor of Jews? Because think about it now. Yes, Juan.
Of Christians. Who crucified? Of Jews.
Who carried out the crucifixion? Rome. Who crucified? Jews. Rome. Who persecuted the church or Christians or Jews who believed in Jesus? Rome.
Paul?
What was he involved in that? He was one of those who participated in that. That's why he doesn't present when he says he converts to the church and all that, he doesn't present a guilty Rome. He never does that. You won't find that anywhere. On the contrary. The blame is always shifted onto the Jews. to the Jews who are to blame and all that. So, of course, there is this affiliation of Paul with a pro-Roman stance.
Okay, I'm going to give you a small example, okay? I'm going to take your argument as a valid one. But I'm going to take your argument and place it today. In 2026, we know that in Jerusalem there are Jews, there are Muslims, right? So as Israel as a state and the Jews are there, the question would be, would the Jews, I mean the Muslims, be subject to your state? Both in civil matters and in religious matters, because that's what you're telling me. That the Jews of the first century were pro-Roman simply because Rome was there ruling. And I say it again, the Muslims, they are in Israel, and the ones who rule are you. Does this mean that the Muslims are subjected to you in every sense of the word? Because that's their argument, Mr. Jack.
That's a very good example, because then, in your example, there are Muslims who are subject to the law of Israel, to what Israel says, and what if Israel limits or doesn't limit, for example, this year during Ramadan, if it forbids them from going up to pray at the Golden Mosque? They must follow Israeli law. But that doesn't mean that Muslims, because of that, are in favor of the state of Israel. It could be that they are against the state of Israel. But there may be individuals in this Muslim group who are not only in favor of the state of Israel, but they may also be in the intelligence service. And they report their own Muslim friends because they don't want Islamic radicalism. And the fact that they work together with the Israeli authorities means that there is a pro-Israeli affinity among some Muslim individuals. It doesn't mean that just because Muslims live under the state of Israel, they are pro-Israeli. In fact, I argue the opposite. The majority of Muslims in Israel are not pro-Israeli. They actually go against the values of the state of Israel. There are some who are in favor, and that's the very example I'm presenting to you. Paul, a person, a citizen of Tarsus who takes pleasure in persecuting Jews in Judea or in the places where he is sent, in Damascus, wherever the event was invented, because the event is not a historical text, in my opinion, but to put it in simple terms. So that's the scenario. What do we have? A Paul pro-Roman, and that's how I would approach it. You're telling me, no, it can't be, because he had permission from the religious authorities. I'm telling you, the religious authority was appointed by the Romans. The religious authorities were pro-Roman. They were the Sadducees. They had been appointed by the Romans. They were basically like puppets. So that's my way of seeing it. I think to not go around in circles, I think you understood my point, right?
Of course. No, I respect the point you're making, but as far as I understand, according to the biblical evidence, Paul wasn't a Sadducee but a Pharisee. But now the example I've given you is very objective to really understand your argument. And we can determine that even though there are Muslims living in Jerusalem, obviously they abide by the civil law of Jerusalem in terms of civil education, right? But they are not obligated to be pro-Israel. Why? Because they have their own culture, they have their own religion. And there, the state of Israel doesn't get involved. It only gets involved here. They just want them to keep and respect the civil and legal matters of that country. The same. In fact, one.
You know that Muslims, sorry for cutting you off like that, you know that Muslims don't have to serve in the Israeli army. They're not obligated. Why do you think that is?
Thank you. Well, that's logical, isn't it? Because they're not going to serve in the Israeli army. That's logical. That's it. But look, and even so, there are Muslims.
There are some Muslims, and there are 1,000. In the entire Israeli army, there are about 1,000 who do serve in the Israeli army. That's my point. Do you understand? So the fact that they lived under a Roman occupation in the first century doesn't mean they're pro-Roman. On the contrary, the Jews rebelled against Rome. The only ones who didn't rebel against Rome and didn't take part in the wars of the Great Revolt, didn't take part in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, it was the Christians. In fact, the biggest break that happened, because at first, as I told you, the Christians were Jews who believed in a Messiah, just like there were other sects who also believed in others, like Bar Giora, I don't know, Bar Kokhba. The point that separates the Christians from the Jews is the Bar Kokhba revolt, because the Christians stood by and did nothing, and the Great Revolt as well, they stood by and did nothing, while their brothers were fighting against Rome and they were not. Because they are not there. They are not there. They are not against any of that. So that's the breaking point. The same pro-Roman thinking continues until this massive break in Christianity happens. It's a topic I haven't analyzed myself. It's been analyzed by academics and, well, sorry for interrupting you, and I also want to take this opportunity while I'm speaking to send greetings to Leda. Thank you for taking part. You have brought me many blessings, and thank you for your contribution. Also, Leon gets a shout out here because he sent me a goodbye.
It's all good. Let's see. Look, I don't know if I've made myself clear, okay? Even though there are 147 people, the example of Muslims, right? For example, citizens of Israel, okay? I wanted to illustrate something very important in which I don't agree with your premise. What I'm saying is that living within a community, okay, or sharing an ethnic or religious identity, it doesn't automatically determine the political loyalty of each individual, because that's obvious, okay? And I gave you an example from the first century, and I gave you another example, even more possible today, where this really happens. And it happens in Israel. Under that premise, obviously, when you directly say that the Apostle Pablo was pro-Roman, that's not the case. We would say, according to that premise. Because you say so, you have used this according to your own thinking, okay? But it's not any kind of proof, what you said.
Let me ask you, in your opinion, what would be the line to cross? That if you cross that line, you're pro-Roman in the first century.
What would be the line to be pro-Roman?
Let's see, you're a pro-Roman Jew, unlike the non-pro-Roman Jews.
All right, very well. I'm going to go. Careful, we're mixing two very important things here, okay? One, the pro-Roman ideology. In the first century, if we're honest, Jacob, this didn't exist. You're inserting modern pro-Roman ideology into a first century context where these concepts clearly weren't present. You're making an anachronistic argument, in other words. But anyway, no, I'll answer you.
Yes, exactly.
I'll answer you. Okay, but listen, I'm careful. Look, I like to listen to people, but we also need to talk, let's say, the way we're talking now. If we're going to talk about the first century, let's go to the first century. Now, accepting the authority of the empire as legitimate back then doesn't mean being pro-Roman. It doesn't mean that Rome had the right to rule and maintain order.
If you allow me to refine the question, and I said it that way not to offend, to repeat it. What is the line that a Jew in the first century must cross to be considered? You can call it anachronistic or not. I don't think it's anachronistic. Pro-Roman.
For me, there, none. I'll say again, why?
How come none? Isn't there a line? I mean,
there isn't a line. Do you know why I'm telling you this, even though this is so?
If that's the case, everyone was pro-Roman, no one was pro-Roman.
No, let me answer you. You asked me a question, Jacob, and I know your point. I can already see where you're going. But being pro-Roman then, okay? It implied acknowledging. I'm going to grant your point, okay?
Don't give me validity. I think the question was very clear. What does a Jew have to do to be considered pro-Roman? Because you're denying that Pablo was pro-Roman. I mean, that attitude, that anachronism doesn't exist. You're admitting yourself that there is pro-Romanism in the first century, right? If you hadn't accepted it, you wouldn't deny Pablo is pro-Roman. So pro-Romanism exists for you.
Or not? What is that line?
That's the question. What did Pablo have to do to cross that line and be considered pro-Roman?
Okay, I'll say it again. I wouldn't consider Pablo pro-Roman, okay? At least not in the way you're saying it now. Because pro-Romanism, or that ideology, didn't exist at that time in the first century. What did exist, and this is true, what did exist historically was that Rome had the right to govern and maintain order. Now, there were religious people or Jews who obviously accepted this authority, whether they liked it or not. That doesn't make them pro-Roman. It simply means that they have to be subject to it. That's why if we look at the topic, the Messiah expected by the Jews was supposed to come and free them from the oppression of Rome.
I'm speaking politically. I'll give you a more specific example. The Pharisees accepted, not all of them. There were branches of the Pharisees who were the Zealots, which was a branch of the Pharisees, but the Pharisees accepted. Or the moderates among the Pharisees, like Yohanan ben Zakkai, accepted the authority of Rome, but they were not pro-Roman. They just accepted their authority. It's like what I told you about the Arabs who live, what?
Pro-Roman? Sorry, pro-Roman? What does it mean to be pro-Roman in the first century? Explain it to me.
I'll tell you what it means to be pro-Roman. Well, it's not just accepting that Rome is the authority, it's acting in favor of Rome remaining the authority, of them staying in power. Like in the case of this Sadducean elite, like in the case of a Paul who goes after people, Jews. Why? To maintain the stability of Rome, and because the pro-Roman elite sends him. In other words, Rome's puppets, according to the account in Acts, send him to persecute Jews. For me, that's the line. If he weren't pro-Roman, he'd say, well, I understand that Rome is there, but we can only put up with them up to a point. To start persecuting people, for me, that's already like to make a comparison, like in the Holocaust when there were capos who collaborated with our enemies, something like that, right? And yeah, stand up, right? I won't trivialize the Holocaust with Pablo, but it's sort of like that, right? The fact that you're already taking sides with Rome in persecuting, for me, that's a line, you know? That's what I mean.
Okay, perfect. Very good.
And I take this opportunity, Mata Matajari, thank you very much. May you have many blessings. Greetings to Italy. Thank you for taking part. I really appreciate your contribution. Kisses to Tashem. May there always be joy. But well, Juan, I think each of us understood the other. I understood your point, and I think you also understood mine. So let's keep learning more from each other.
All right. If you can give me one more minute.
Yes.
With pleasure. In the meantime,
No.
look, it's the first time I've come up here. Systems. And I've listened to you, your videos on YouTube, I've listened to a lot, and I like a lot of your points. And I was saying, well, no, so I don't bother you anymore with the topic since you've already finished it. And I was saying I would like to go up with this gentleman and have a conversation. And honestly, Mr. Yakov, it has been a pleasure, an honor to be able to talk with you. You are very polite, and I try to be the same way as well. And I hope this won't be the first or the last time I come up, so we can have these conversations that really build up those who are listening to us. So I am a Christian, and as a Christian, I say to you many blessings, and thank you for having me, Mr. Yakov.
Thank you, Juan, for your patience and also for not losing your temper. Like many people lose their cool when they try to maneuver an argument and see another point of view, and people who lose their cool, and that's not the case with you, I'm glad. So I also send you my regards.
Shalom.
Shalom. Great, that's how pleasant it is to exchange, to have a dialogue without so much echo and drama. It's fine, everyone has their own perspective.